The community hall was the busiest place in town that Saturday morning. It was the day of the annual working dog auction, a serious event for serious people. Pickup trucks with mud on their tires filled the parking lot, and inside the air was warm and thick with the smells of fresh coffee, sawdust from the floor, and the clean, furry smell of dogs. A man people called Grandpa Joe found 2 empty chairs near the back, right by the heavy door. Next to him, his 10-year-old granddaughter tried to see over the row of wide cowboy hats in front of them. She was a quiet girl with very watchful eyes. She wasn't there to run around or make noise. She was there because of a promise. "Remember," Grandpa Joe whispered, leaning down close to her ear. "We're just looking, like we said. One last time for the memory." She nodded, her eyes already scanning the metal pens set up near the front. Her grandma, who had passed away last spring, had loved border collies. She'd trained them on their small farm for 40 years. Now the farm was sold, and next week she and her grandfather were moving to an apartment in the city. This auction was their goodbye to a whole world. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip over the microphone, and the sale began. One by one, beautiful, sleek dogs with shiny coats were led into the small ring. They were all business no wagging tails, just sharp eyes and tense muscles. The prices flew fast, called out in sharp voices by men and women in work jackets. It was about bloodlines, training, and strong hips. It felt more like buying a tractor than finding a friend. The little girl watched, but her heart wasn't in it. These perfect dogs seemed like pictures from her grandma's old books. Then her gaze drifted to the last pen on the side. In it sat a dog that looked nothing like the others. He was mostly black and white, but his fur was shaggy in some places and short in others, like he'd never had a proper brush. He wasn't standing alert. He was sitting hunched in the back corner, head low, and his eyes. One was a pale, icy blue, and the other a warm, dark brown. They stared out at the busy crowd, not with excitement, but with a kind of tired sadness. A piece of paper stuck to his pen read, "Lot 19, herding mix, untrained." As the bidding for an elegant purebred collie reached a fever pitch, the little girl slipped from her chair. She moved quietly along the back wall, drawn to that lonely pen. She crouched down a few feet away, making herself small. She didn't call out or whistle. She just waited slowly. The dog's brown and blue eyes shifted and found hers. His ear twitched. She didn't reach for him. She just opened her hand, palm up, and rested it on her knee. A long moment passed. Then the dog's tail gave the smallest, quietest thump against the metal pen. Just once. It wasn't a happy wag. It was more like a quiet hello. A large shadow fell over her. "Hey, you can't be back here." She looked up. A big man with a red face and a clipboard was frowning down at her. He was one of the auction helpers. "I'm not touching him," she said softly. "Rules are rules. No kids near the stock. You'll get Em all riled up. Where's your parent?" Grandpa Joe was already hurrying over. "It's all right, she's with me. She wasn't doing any harm." The man's voice was loud, and people nearby were starting to look. "I said no minors. You're disrupting the auction. I'm going to have to ask you both to leave." Her grandfather's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is a public event. She's being quieter than half your bidders." But the man was already gesturing firmly toward the door. "Out, now, or I call the manager." Feeling every single eye in the place on her back, the little girl stood up. Her cheeks burned. She looked once more at the dog in the pen. His head was low again, as if he understood he'd caused her trouble. That hurt more than being yelled at. Grandpa Joe put a firm, steady arm around her shoulders. "Come on, sweetheart. We don't need this." His voice was tight. They walked out of the warm, noisy hall into the crisp, quiet air of the parking lot. The heavy door swung shut behind them, cutting off the sound of the auctioneer and the applause. The girl's eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She just felt a hollow sadness, not just for herself, but for the dog with the different colored eyes, who was about to be sold like a piece of used furniture, with no one seeing what she saw. The slam of the truck door was a final, heavy sound. The girl sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the gravel parking lot. The excitement of the morning, the quiet hope of seeing her grandmother's favorite kind of dog one last time, had all been crushed. Now it was just shame, hot and prickly on her skin. Her grandfather started the engine, then stopped. He didn't put the truck in gear. He just sat there, his rough hands resting on the steering wheel. He let out a long, tired breath. "I'm sorry about that in there," he said, his voice softer now. "That fellow was rude. Had no call to embarrass you like that." The girl just nodded. She wasn't angry at her grandfather. She was angry at the man with the clipboard, and at the whole crowd in there who thought rules about stock were more important than being kind. A faint cheer leaked out from the community hall, followed by the rapid-fire voice of the auctioneer on a loudspeaker. They could still hear the sale going on. The sound of it felt like a mockery. "They were wrong, you know," she said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but clear in the quiet cab of the truck. "About kicking us out?" "Sure they were," Grandpa agreed. "No," she said, turning to look at him. Her eyes were serious. "About the dog. Lot 19. They were wrong about him." Her grandfather looked at her, waiting. "He wasn't scared," she explained, the words coming out in a careful rush. "When all the other dogs were let in, they were jumpy or trying to pull away. He was just still. And his eyes. Grandpa, he was watching everything. He was watching the people, the other dogs, the auctioneer. He was figuring it all out. He wasn't a dud. He was the smartest one in there. They just couldn't see it." Her grandfather listened. He had learned, after many years with his wife, and now with his granddaughter, that sometimes the quietest people and animals saw the most. He didn't dismiss her. Through the open window, the auctioneer's voice became clearer. "Beautiful lines on this one. A real worker. Do I hear 400? 450? Thank you, sold." Another dog gone to a new owner. The girl's stomach tightened. They must be getting close to lot 19 dot, as if on cue. The crackly speaker announced, "All right, folks, moving right along. Lot number 19 next. Herding mix. Good project for someone." There was a pause. The girl could picture the scene. The shaggy dog being led into the ring, looking out of place. She could almost feel the crowd's lack of interest. The auctioneer's voice came through, trying to spark some life. "Come on now. He's got a strong look. Plenty of potential. Do I hear $20? $20 for a smart farm dog?" Silence from the crowd. A beat of awkward quiet drifted out to the parking lot. The auctioneer tried a joke. His voice was tinny through the speaker. $10? Heck, I've paid more for a good barn cat. A few low chuckles from the audience filtered out. The sound made the girl's hands curl into fists in her lap. They were laughing at him. All right," the auctioneer said, his patience thinning. "Last call. $10? Going once?" The girl acted before she even fully thought. Her hand flew to the door handle, and she pushed it open, hopping down onto the gravel. "Whoa, where are you going?" her grandfather asked, surprised. She didn't answer. She stood beside the truck, listening. The auctioneer's going twice. Hung in the air dot, she turned and looked at her grandfather through the open door. Her face, which had been so sad and angry, was now set with a calm determination he recognized. It was the same look her grandmother got when she knew, without a doubt, what was right. "Grandpa," she said, and her voice didn't shake, "I have to make a bid." He started to speak, probably to say they didn't have the money, that they were already kicked out, but she stopped him. "I know what to offer," she said. Her eyes were bright and sure. "I know what my bid is." She reached for her small, worn-out pink backpack on the floor of the truck. It was the one she'd had for years, the fabric a little faded. She unzipped it carefully. Inside weren't toys or games. There was a small notebook, a pencil, a water bottle, and a little velvet pouch. She didn't pull out the pouch. Instead, she took out the notebook and the pencil. She leaned against the truck seat and started to write, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth, in concentration. But her grandfather watched, his confusion turning into curiosity. He shut off the engine. The sudden quiet was heavy. From the hall, they heard the auctioneer's final disinterested, "No bid," and lot 19 is, "Wait." The girl wasn't shouting, but her voice was firm. She slammed the notebook shut, clutching it in one hand. She looked at her grandfather, not for permission, but for support. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I'm the only one who saw him, so I'm the only one who can bid." Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the community hall doors, her small figure straight, the notebook held tightly against her chest. Her grandfather slowly got out of the truck and followed a few steps behind, ready to stand beside her, ready to see what his remarkable granddaughter was about to do. The chilly morning air seemed to buzz with anticipation. The heavy wooden door of the community hall was even harder to push open the second time. A slice of noisy, warm air hit her face as she stepped inside. She didn't try to sneak or hide. She just walked in, right to the edge of the crowded room, and stopped. Her grandfather stood in the doorway behind her, a solid, silent shadow. For a second, nobody noticed them. All eyes were on the auction ring. The shaggy dog with the different colored eyes was standing there, not on a lead, but just loosely held by the same helper who had thrown them out. The dog wasn't trying to run. He just looked, resigned. His head was slightly lowered, his tail tucked. The auctioneer, a man with a thick mustache and a tired expression, was shrugging. "All right, folks, no interest. We'll withdraw lot 19, and I bid." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear as a bell in the momentary quiet. It cut through the low chatter and the rustle of catalogs. Heads snapped around. The helper with the clipboard scowled, his face flushing an even deeper red. "You again." "I told you to," but the auctioneer held up a hand, his curiosity piqued. He peered over his glasses at the small girl standing by the door. A faint, slightly weary smile touched his lips. He'd seen all kinds of things at auctions, but this was new. "You got a pocket full of allowance money, young lady. This ain't a bake sale." The starting bid was $10. A few people in the crowd chuckled, not unkindly, but in that way adults do when a child says something unexpectedly bold. The little girl didn't flinch. She didn't look at the laughing people or the angry helper. She looked straight at the auctioneer, and then, for a long moment, at the dog. The dog's ears twitched forward. His blue and brown eyes locked onto hers. She took a few steps forward. The room grew quieter. Even the people who had been chuckling stopped, sensing something shift in the air. She walked until she was at the very front of the crowd, facing the wooden auction block. She didn't hold up money. Instead, she held up her small, worn notebook, open to a page she had just written on. Her hand was steady. "My bid," she said, her voice gaining strength, filling the space, "is a forever home." She paused, letting the words hang there. The auctioneer's smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine surprise. "I bid 3 walks a day," she continued, reading from her page, but mostly speaking from her heart. Rain or shine. And my last piece of chicken, every single Sunday dinner. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. It wasn't a laugh. It was something else. I bid lessons, she said, her eyes flicking to the dog and then back to the adults watching her. He can teach me how to herd, because I think he knows how. And I'll teach him how to play fetch, because I don't think anyone ever has. She took a small breath, her voice softening just a bit, but in the silent room, everyone could hear. And I bid. All the love I've been saving up. Since my grandma passed away. I've been saving it for something important. He's important. She closed her notebook and lowered her hand. The silence in the hall was now complete and heavy. You could hear the soft panting of the dogs in their pens. The helper who had thrown her out was just staring, his mouth slightly open, his clipboard forgotten at his side. The dog in the ring took a single slow step forward. He didn't look at the auctioneer or the crowd. He just looked at the girl. And then his tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. Just once. It was an answer. The auctioneer was completely speechless. He just stood there, his gavel frozen in mid-air. He looked from the intense, hopeful face of the little girl to the dog, who was now watching her with an alertness it hadn't shown all day. The spell was broken by the helper. He found his voice, gruff and dismissive. That's not a legal bid. You can't pay with chicken and walks. This is a business transaction. He said the last words like they were the most important words in the world. The little girl didn't argue. She just stood her ground. Her grandfather moved then, walking to stand right beside her. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on her shoulder. His presence was like a rock. The auctioneer finally lowered his gavel. He scratched his head under his hat, looking utterly bewildered. He'd sold thousands of dogs. He'd heard bids in the thousands of dollars. But he had never, in all his years, heard a bid like this. It was an offer that had no price tag, but somehow, in the quiet, sincere voice of a child, it sounded more valuable than any number he'd called out all morning. The crowd was waiting. Some people were looking down at their hands, thoughtful. Others were watching the dog, seeing him differently now, through the girl's eyes. The helper crossed his arms. Sure, his point about rules had won, but the little girl had stopped the auction dead in its tracks. With a few simple words, she had turned a sad, unwanted animal into a creature worthy of the deepest promise one person could make to another. She wasn't just bidding for a dog. She was offering a life, and in return, asking for his trust. And the whole room, for a moment, understood the difference. The heavy silence was broken by the scrape of a chair. It was a rough, tired sound. From the very front row, an old man stood up. He was the kind of man who looked like he was part of the land itself. His face was a map of lines and wrinkles, carved deep by years of sun and wind. His hands, resting on the back of the chair in front of him, were big and knotted, the skin like old leather. He had been sitting perfectly still all morning, a quiet statue in a worn denim jacket. Most people in the room knew him. He was one of the oldest ranchers in the whole county. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. He turned slowly, not toward the auctioneer, but to face the little girl still standing by the door. He looked at her for a long moment. He saw the notebook clutched to her chest. He saw the way her chin was lifted, even though she was probably scared. He saw the pure, fierce hope in her eyes. Then he cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel shifting. "I'll vouch for that bid," he said. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the suddenly quiet hall. The helper with the clipboard looked stunned, like someone had just spoken in a forgotten language. "Vouch?" The helper sputtered. "You can't vouch for for feelings and chicken bones. This is a cash sale." The old man turned his calm, steady gaze on the helper, and the younger man's words dried up. He then looked back at the auctioneer. "I've been coming to this auction for longer than you've been holding the gavel, son," the old rancher said. There was no boast in his voice, just simple fact. "I've bought dogs, sold cattle, traded land. I've heard bids made with greed, with ego, with more money than sense." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the crowd, making sure they were all listening. "But what I just heard from this child, that wasn't a bid made with money. That was a bid made with sight. She saw the dog. The rest of us," he said, a hint of sadness in his rough voice, "we just looked." He shifted his feet, his old boots solid on the floorboards. She stated her terms clear as day. A forever home. 3 walks. Last piece of chicken. Lessons. Love. He said each word slowly, giving it its proper weight. "That's a contract. The best kind there is." He reached into the chest pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple old leather wallet, worn smooth at the edges. He flipped it open and took out a single $20 bill. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. "Now, I understand there's a book that needs balancing," he said, looking at the auctioneer. "So to make it square for the ledger, I'll match your bid. I'll put this $20 to the house, right here and now, on one condition." He turned his head, and his sharp eyes landed on the girl's grandfather. "That her guardian here agrees out loud to the terms his girl just promised. The whole thing. The walks, the chicken, the forever. Do you, sir?" All the air seemed to leave the room. Every single person was watching the grandfather. He felt the pressure of all those eyes, but he only felt the light pressure of his granddaughter leaning against him. He looked down at her. She looked up, her eyes wide and solemn, waiting. In that moment, he didn't see a problem or a stray dog. He saw his wife's spirit looking back at him. He saw a lonely apartment in the city, suddenly feeling less empty. He saw a purpose. He stood up a little straighter. He looked the old rancher right in the eye, then the auctioneer, and finally he looked at the dog, who was watching this human drama with quiet attention. "I do," the grandfather said, his voice firm and clear. "You have my word. Her bid is my promise. Every bit of it." A sigh seemed to go through the crowd, a collective release of held breath. The tension that had been so sharp just moments ago began to soften, melting into something warmer. A woman near the back sniffled quietly. A few of the stern-faced farmers nodded, their expressions softening into something like respect. The auctioneer looked truly stunned. He glanced from the determined girl to the $20 bill in the old rancher's hand, to the dog, who now seemed to be standing a little taller. He ran a hand over his face. The rule book in his head was fighting a losing battle against the simple, powerful truth happening right in front of him. Finally, he let out a short, surprised laugh. It was a good sound. He shook his head, a real smile breaking through his professional mask. "Well," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't usually show at work, "I guess that settles it." He raised his gavel. Going once for the bid as stated, backed by the gentleman's $20. Going twice. The helper just stood by the ring, his clipboard hanging at his side. He was staring at the floor, his earlier bluster completely gone. He had been out-argued not by shouts, but by something much, much stronger. Asterisk, 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 crack. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sound of the gavel was sharp and final. Sold. To the young lady in the back. For a sum that's worth more than its weight in gold. This time, the applause didn't wait. It burst out immediately loud, hearty, and full of genuine warmth. People were clapping and smiling, not at a sale, but at a story. They were clapping for the girl, for her grandfather, for the old man's wisdom, and for the scruffy dog who had, against all odds, found the one person who saw him. The little girl's serious face finally broke into a huge, wobbly smile. She buried her face in her grandfather's shirt for a second, her shoulders shaking once with relief. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. The old rancher walked to the auction stand, placed his $20 bill down, and turned. He didn't go back to his seat. He walked over to the girl and her grandfather. He stopped in front of them. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at the girl and gave one slow, deep nod. It was a nod of respect from one living creature who understood value to another. Then he tipped the brim of his hat, turned, and walked out into the daylight, his part in the story complete. The auction was over for them. The real work, the joyful work of keeping a promise, was about to begin. The paperwork was a simple form, but the man behind the table filled it out with more care than he had for any other that day. Under price, he wrote, $20 and bid as stated. Under buyer's name, he started to write the grandfather's name, but the older man shook his head and pointed to his granddaughter. The man smiled and wrote her name instead. While they did that, the helper who had caused all the trouble earlier was the one who brought the dog out. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked awkward, a little ashamed. He held the rope lead out to the grandfather. He's a good dog. Just needed the right situation, he mumbled, not meeting their eyes. Before turning quickly and walking away, the dog stood still on the end of the rope. The noise and the crowd were gone now. It was just him, the girl, and her grandfather in the quiet space near the entrance. The girl knelt down on the concrete floor, not caring about the dust. She didn't rush forward to hug him. She just sat back on her heels and patted her knees softly. "It's okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not a lot number anymore." The dog stood there for a long moment, his blue and brown eyes taking her in. He sniffed the air. Then, with a quiet sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of his paws, he walked the 2 steps forward and rested his chin heavily on her knee. He closed his eyes. It wasn't a playful nudge or an excited lick. It was an act of surrender, of trust. It was as if he was saying, "I'm so tired. I'll let you take it from here." The girl slowly, carefully, raised her hand and placed it gently between his ears. His fur was coarse and a little matted, but warm. She just left her hand there. A steady, gentle weight. Her grandfather watched, his throat feeling tight. He'd seen his wife make that same connection 100 times. It was a kind of magic that had nothing to do with tricks and everything to do with quiet understanding. "We'll need a proper lead," her grandfather said, his voice husky. "And a bowl. And food." As if he had heard him, the old rancher appeared again in the doorway. He wasn't empty-handed. In his grip was a beautiful, well-used leather lead, soft and darkened with years of use. He walked over and held it out to the girl. "This was my old lead," he said. "For my best dog, long time ago. It's seen a lot of work. It knows the way." He didn't explain any more. He didn't need to. The girl took it with both hands. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "For everything." The old man gave another one of his slow nods. "You two saw each other," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the whole trick of it. The rest is just details." He touched the brim of his hat, a final gesture, and was gone. With gentle hands, the girl unhooked the rough rope from the dog's collar and clipped the old leather lead in its place. It looked right there. They walked out of the community hall together, the dog falling into step right beside her left leg as if he'd always been there. The bright afternoon sun made them all blink dot at the old truck. The grandfather lowered the tailgate. Up you go, he said to the dog. The dog looked at the girl. She nodded. In one smooth, easy motion, the dog leapt up into the bed of the truck and turned around, sitting down neatly, facing forward. He wasn't a shivering mess anymore. He looked purposeful. The girl insisted on riding in the back with him. Her grandfather knew better than to argue. He found an old blanket for her to sit on and made her promise to hold on tight. As the truck rolled slowly out of the gravel lot onto the paved road, the wind began to whip around them. The girl sat with her back against the cab. The dog settled right beside her. For the first few miles, they just rode in silence, watching the fences and fields go by. Then the dog shifted. He moved closer and carefully, slowly, lowered his head until it was resting on her shoulder. His weight was solid and comforting. She leaned her cheek against the top of his warm, furry head. She thought about her grandma, about the empty spot she'd left behind. She hadn't known how to fill it. She thought she'd been saving her love, but maybe she was wrong. Maybe love wasn't something you saved. Maybe it was something you gave away, and it was the giving that filled you back up. "I'm going to call you Scout," she said into the wind, her words carried away behind them. The dog's ear twitched against her neck. He understood. A name was the first lesson. They weren't going home to the farm. That chapter was closed. They were heading to a small apartment, a busy street, a life that was going to be very different. But as the truck carried them towards that unknown future, the girl didn't feel scared. She had a friend now, a partner. She had promised him walks and chicken and lessons. And he had already taught her the most important one, that being seen is the beginning of everything. In the back of the bumping truck, under the wide sky, the girl and the dog sat together. The auction was far behind them. The city was somewhere ahead. But right there, in that moment, with the sun warming their faces and the road humming beneath them, they had everything they needed. They had a promise, and they had each other.